we can just pause and have some nice awkward silence.
Elevator music.
Yeah,
chimes in.
right. All right, Mike, so we've talked a little bit about the different analytical methods that are out there. Let's talk about some of the challenges in the laboratory. Why is PFAS so difficult to analyze? What are some of the things that we struggle with in the laboratory?
So, one of the first things that comes to mind when it comes to PFAS analysis difficulties is the physical chemical differences between the PFAS we analyze. So we're analyzing anything from a C4 all the way up to a C18. So you got a huge difference in polarity between those types of molecules. And then everything in between, so it's not just C4 to C18, it's C4, C5, C6, and so forth. So a lot of difference in polarity that impacts, the solubility of these compounds. So we have to be careful to balance out what the solvents are that we're dealing with.
Right.
And we also have to be careful when we're prepping the samples, because those C18s, they like to stick to the bottle that they came in on. They don't like to be in water, especially if it's clean water. They like dirty water better because they've got more things to adhere to and hang on to, but they don't like being in plain water. So just the chemical diversity of the compounds we analyze for, I think that's one of the first things that come to mind.
Sure. And so with the different types of chemicals that you have there, having one method that's going to capture all of that data has to be pretty challenging. What does that mean for the instrumentation that we use? Can you talk a little bit about the cleanliness, the maintenance, some of the challenges we see with the equipment?
Yeah, so the equipment maintenance is one of the things that we have to be careful of is we're looking at these compounds at part per trillion levels, right? So super low level. So you have to have really well-maintained equipment. We have preventative maintenance that has to be followed. We also have routine maintenance. So we have to have our staff are trained in how do they prepare the instrument for each day? And when do they go, they have a routine they go through to make sure it's in tip-top shape for each day they run samples for PFAS. I think another thing that, related to the instrumentation, two things. One, chromatographically, that chemical diversity I was telling you about, it makes it a challenge, again, when you're trying to set up a chromatographic system and a solvent system that'll let C4s be retained in the same instance as C18s. So we've found that balance. So that's one key. And then secondly, I would say, there's a lot of data being generated.
Well, I was going to say, you talked a little bit about the chromatogram itself. I've seen some of these. The peaks are wild. Can you talk a little bit about the data generation itself, what we're really seeing and the reduction in the interpretation?
Yeah, so when we're doing the analysis itself, is a technique called LCMS-MS. The ionization technique, mass specs have to have an ion to start with, so you have to make an ion. The ionization technique we use is called electrospray ionization. So one of the strengths of electrospray ionization is very efficient at making the ions. One of the downsides is it's very efficient at making ions. So what do I mean by that? Anything that can make a negative ion, we're running for PFAS in negative ion mode, will be made. And so that can cause problems. You can have ion suppression, ion enhancement. And, when you got that going on, if you don't have a good isotopically labeled standard, it can throw your quantitation.
Sure.
So that's one of the reasons that we talk about the gold standard being isotope dilution. That's one of the primary reasons on the analytical side. And then sort of anecdotally, on the sample prep side, it's equally important because if you have losses during the extraction, if you've got an isotopically labeled standard that's been spiked prior to that extraction, it'll experience the same losses.
Sure. And that all assumes a relatively clean sample, right? And that is definitely not what we typically see in the laboratory.
No, we do not. We have a wide variety of what is considered water, right? So some of the waters look like what you would expect, like, a common, looks like water. Other things that we call water resembles nothing like what you would expect water to resemble. So, looks like something that came off an oil spill somewhere, and then that's a water sample. So we have a lot of diversity in the types of samples we receive, and that definitely adds to the complexity. One of the things that we're able to do is take steps before we extract the sample to try to address some of these things. So we can do things like either centrifuge out solids, or we can use ultrafiltration to filter out particulate matter. But without the latitude to do those things, it would be almost impossible to get 500 mils of sample through our SPE cartridges in some cases.
Sure. A lot of moving parts, a lot of things to consider. Got complex matrices that we're dealing with, right? And the importance of the correct preparation and the addition of the isotope dilution, maintaining the equipment correctly and making sure there's no lab contamination. And then I really appreciated your comments about data reduction. I haven't seen those chromatograms. And then validation.
Yeah, well, when you think about it, there are over 100 chromatographic peaks generated for every injection for 1633. Over 100. So, again, most people who haven't had to go in and actually operate an instrument or run an instrument, you probably wouldn't think that. You think, hey, there's 40 compounds, so you probably have 40 things to look at.
Right.
But it's not, it's not quite that straightforward. We have quantitation ions that we use primarily for quantifying. We also have a qualification ion because it's important to ensure that, what we're calling a PFAS compound is indeed a PFAS compound. Right. So we use retention time, and we also use that qualification ion and the ratio of the qualification ion to the quantitation ion. And then on top of all that, we have the extracted standards that we were talking about just a minute ago that go in before extraction and kind of compensate for any losses that occur during the extraction. And then we have the unextracted standards so we can calculate recoveries of those extracted standards. So there's a lot going on, but fortunately we have a team that knows it like the back of their hand, and they execute well. So at the end of the day, our customers get good, solid data they can rely on to make good decisions.
That's right. I've seen some of these forensic shows on TV, and they just put the sample in and they hit the button and they get the data out. And what I'm hearing here is that's not how it works, right?
It's not, but I would love for it to. That would be awesome.
That's great stuff. And in the world of PFAS, which is forever changing, I hope to see you for the next episode.